Welcome to KOT Aero, knowledge on tap for the aerospace community. Subscribe for free at kotaero.com. All right, let's dive into it.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today we're going to be looking at something you might not think about that often.
Okay.
Which is how we make airplanes even more secure.
Interesting.
Especially the flight deck.
Right.
We're going to be dissecting an official document.
Oh, wow.
Straight from the Federal Register.
Uh-huh.
It sounds kind of intense.
Yeah, it does.
But it's actually really fascinating.
I bet.
It's all about adding another layer of protection to the cockpit.
Okay.
And there's some history here that might actually surprise you.
Oh, really?
Ooh.
I'm intrigued.
So are you ready to get into it?
Absolutely.
All right, so this document is titled Installation and Operation of Flight Deck Installed Physical Secondary Barriers
Well, that's a mouthful.
on Transport Category Airplanes in Part 121 service.
Okay.
Basically, it's laying down the law.
Okay.
Literally.
Got it.
The FAA is making these new barriers mandatory on all new passenger planes built after August 25th, 2025,
All right.
if they're going to be flying within the U.S.
So new planes in the U.S. got it.
Right.
That makes sense.
Now, this isn't just the FAA deciding to add an extra bell or whistle.
Right.
This came directly from Congress.
Oh, wow.
In the 2018 FAA Reauthorization Act,
Okay.
they flagged this as a serious security concern.
It's pretty high up.
Definitely. And what's really interesting is they didn't just decree it from on high.
Okay.
The FAA actually brought together a whole team of experts.
Interesting.
Airlines, pilots, manufacturers, you name it.
So everyone involved.
To figure out the best way to do this.
To get it right.
And this group is called the Aviation Rulemaking Advisory Committee, or ARC.
ARCAC got it.
Exactly.
So what exactly EIS this new layer of protection?
They're called IPSBs.
IPSBs.
Short for Installed Physical Secondary Barriers.
So like a barrier in addition to the door?
Think of it as a temporary shield.
Okay.
That pops into place when the cockpit door is open.
Oh, so when the door has to be open, there's something else there.
Right. Now, these aren't just flimsy partitions.
Yeah.
These things have to be tough.
Makes sense.
They need to withstand force from either side.
Right.
Delay someone trying to get through for at least 5 seconds.
Okay.
And keep that person from actually reaching the cockpit door.
Wow.
So that precious time
Yeah.
gives the crew a chance to react.
Right.
And lock things down.
So it's like a buffer.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And here's where they got really specific.
Okay.
These IPSBs can't block the view between the cabin and the cockpit.
That makes sense.
That way, the crew can still see what's happening.
So they're not completely blind.
Right. Situational awareness is key.
Definitely.
Now, you might be wondering how everyone felt about this new rule.
Yeah. Were people for it?
Well, the document actually details the public's reaction.
Okay.
And let me tell you, people had opinions.
I bet they did.
Some people thought the deadline for airlines to comply was too long.
Oh, really?
They wanted it done within a year.
Wow, that's fast.
Yeah.
And others?
Others argued for a more relaxed time frame, like 3 years.
Right.
Because designing and installing these barriers isn't exactly a simple process.
Yeah, it sounds pretty complicated.
Especially given how many different types of planes are out there.
Makes sense. So many different models.
Talk about a tough decision.
Yeah, who do you listen to?
Right. So, in the end, the FAA decided to stick with a 2-year implementation period.
Okay.
But it wasn't just U.S. voices in the mix.
Oh, really?
This is where it gets a bit global.
I'm listening.
And this part really caught my eye.
Okay.
You're talking about the feedback from Brazil's aviation authority, ANS.
ANS.
They wanted to make sure the wording of this rule was super precise.
Why is that?
They were concerned that if it wasn't worded carefully,
Yeah.
it might accidentally become a requirement
Okay.
for countries that might not face the same security threats as the U.S.
That makes sense.
So even though this is a U.S. rule, it's interesting to see how it ripples out
Yeah.
and potentially impacts how other countries think about flight deck security.
So it has global implications.
It really does. Now, another hot button issue was whether or not older planes
Okay.
should be retrofitted with these IPSBs.
That's interesting.
After all, if you're trying to close security gaps,
Yeah.
wouldn't it make sense to cover all the bases?
It seems like it would. Yeah.
So what did they say?
Well, there were some groups who felt very strongly that all passenger planes should have them.
Oh, wow.
They argued that leaving older planes without these barriers would be a major oversight.
So a big safety concern.
Potentially.
So did the FAA agree?
They decided to focus on new builds for this specific ruling.
So kind of starting small.
Right. Makes sense to start somewhere.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But you can bet the retrofitting debate isn't going away anytime soon.
Probably not, no. And speaking of what this rule does and doesn't cover,
Okay.
it's interesting to note that cargo planes
Yeah.
and international carriers weren't included.
Interesting.
This rule is specifically for U.S. passenger carriers,
Okay.
aligning with that initial direction from Congress back in 2018.
So really following that initial mandate.
Exactly.
Okay, but get this.
What?
The document mentions that some groups actually requested more staff on smaller planes.
Wow.
You know those with 19 to 50 seats?
Yeah.
Because of this new barrier.
Right?
Think about it.
Right.
Those planes usually have only one flight attendant.
Right.
If that attendant has to go into the cockpit,
Yeah.
and the new barrier is in place,
Uh-huh.
there's literally no one left in the cabin.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think about that.
So they were suggesting 2 flight attendants on those smaller planes.
Seriously.
Talk about a logistical and financial hurdle.
Wow.
Right?
What did the FAA say?
The FAA pushed back.
Okay.
They said the existing safety procedures are good enough,
Uh-huh.
and adding more staff wasn't necessary.
Wow, so they really held their ground there.
They did.
Interesting.
It really highlights the balancing act involved.
Yeah.
You want to ramp up security, but you also have to consider the practicalities of implementing it.
You can't just do something without thinking about how it's going to work.
And of course, the elephant in the room is always cost.
Right.
But here's the thing.
What?
The document actually breaks down the FAA's cost-benefit analysis.
Okay.
And it's pretty eye-opening.
I'm all ears.
So what did it say?
They estimate that each IPSB will cost about $35,000 to install,
Okay.
which, let's be honest, isn't a small number,
No, it's not.
especially for smaller airlines.
Right.
But then they did something really interesting.
Oh.
They used data from the cost of the 9/11 attacks in New York City
Wow.
to figure out the point at which this rule would actually pay for itself.
Wow. What'd they find?
Get this.
Okay.
If it prevents just one successful attack
Uh-huh.
in the next 150 years,
Wow.
it's considered worth it.
So they're really thinking long-term.
That's the long view, isn't it?
Yeah.
Putting a price tag on preventing even one tragedy is almost impossible,
No, it really is.
but it underscores the enormous stakes involved.
It really makes you think about the bigger picture.
It does.
It absolutely does.
We've covered a lot of ground here,
We have.
but there's so much more to unpack.
You're not kidding.
Yeah.
Hold on tight, because we're going to dive even deeper into the implications of this new FAA ruling
Okay.
and what it means for the future of flying right after this.
Looking forward to it
We'll be right back.
after the break.
So before, we were talking about that cost-benefit analysis,
Yeah.
and the FAA made a really powerful point
Yeah.
that if this new barrier prevents even one attack over the next 150 years,
Uh-huh.
they consider it a worthwhile investment.
It makes you think about how you can't really put a price tag on safety.
No, you really can't, especially when it comes to aviation.
Exactly.
And while the FAA clearly sees this as a step in the right direction,
Right.
there are some folks out there who think it doesn't go far enough.
That's true.
Some critics are saying
Yeah.
that the IPSB mandate should be broader.
Interesting.
Remember how we were talking about cargo planes
Uh-huh.
and international flights?
Right.
Those are definitely some areas where there's ongoing discussion.
Makes sense.
And then there's that question of retrofitting those older planes.
Right.
The FAA decided to focus on new builds for now,
Yeah.
but you know that conversation is far from
I
over.
can imagine.
It would be a huge undertaking to retrofit the entire existing fleet.
It would.
I mean, it's definitely something that will need to be addressed at some point,
For sure.
especially if we're serious about closing those security gaps.
Exactly.
Every passenger plane should have this extra layer of protection.
It makes you wonder what the future holds for flight deck security.
It really does.
Right now, we're talking about physical barriers,
Uh-huh.
but technology is constantly changing.
That's what I find so fascinating about all of this.
Me too.
We might even see a shift away from relying only on those physical barriers.
Right.
Imagine the possibilities.
Like what?
Biometric authentication,
Okay.
where you have to scan your fingerprint
Uh-huh.
or even your iris.
Oh, wow.
to even get near the cockpit.
Seriously?
Or AI-powered systems
Okay.
that constantly analyze passenger behavior.
To do what?
To detect potential threats before they even become an issue.
So like preventative measures.
Exactly.
It's almost like we're in a high-tech arms race.
Kind of.
But instead of weapons, we're developing smarter ways to keep the skies safe.
I like that.
It's true.
And it's not a one-and-done deal.
Right.
It's a constant process
Of what?
of assessing threats,
Okay.
developing new strategies,
Right.
and adapting to whatever comes next.
Always staying ahead of the curve.
This FAA ruling is just one piece
Yeah.
of a much larger, ever-evolving puzzle.
A very important puzzle.
We've focused a lot on the technology and regulations. But let's not forget about the human element here.
That's essential too.
The pilots and flight attendants.
Yeah.
They're on the front lines.
Absolutely.
Technology can be a powerful tool,
Yes.
but it's the training,
Right.
the vigilance,
Right.
and the quick thinking of the crew
I agree.
that can make all the difference in a critical situation.
For sure.
And they need to be prepared for whatever comes their way,
Absolutely.
especially as these technologies evolve.
So training is more important than ever.
Absolutely.
Pilots and flight attendants need to be well-versed
In what?
in how these systems work,
Right.
how to respond effectively to potential threats,
Mm-hmm.
and how to maintain situational awareness,
Right.
even in a really high-pressure environment.
Which is tough to do.
Yeah, it's a demanding job,
It is.
but it's so critical to the safety of everyone on board.
This new rule really highlights that aviation security is a shared responsibility, doesn't it?
It does.
It's not just on the shoulders of the crew or
Right.
the FAA or even the airlines.
We all play a role.
I couldn't agree more.
Passengers need to be aware of their surroundings. Report anything suspicious.
Right.
Ground crews play a vital role, too,
In what way?
in inspecting the aircraft
Okay.
and making sure everything is secure.
Yeah, and policymakers need to ensure that there's adequate funding and support for all of these measures.
So true.
It takes a coordinated effort on every level
I agree.
to keep this whole system working effectively.
It really does.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
From the nuts and bolts of these new barriers
Yeah.
to the larger implications for the future of aviation security.
Definitely a fascinating deep dive.
It really has been.
But this is just the beginning of the conversation.
There's so much more to explore in this complex and constantly changing field.
Absolutely.
It's a reminder that we can't become complacent.
No, we can't.
We have to keep asking questions,
Right.
pushing the boundaries,
Yeah.
and seeking out innovative solutions to keep pace with those evolving threats.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Now, for those of you listening who are hungry for more,
Yes.
I highly recommend checking out that full document we've been discussing on regulations.gov.
It's definitely worth a read.
And the next time you're on a flight, take a moment to think about the intricate web of security measures that are in place
All those things working silently behind the scenes to protect you.
and ensure a smooth journey
Exactly.
from those reinforced cockpit doors
Right.
to the highly trained crew to the constant vigilance of security personnel.
All working together.
It's a complex system.
All orchestrated to keep us safe at 30,000 feet.
Really is a testament to human ingenuity.
It is.
No matter what challenges arise,
Yeah.
we're constantly striving to make flying safer.
And more secure.
And that commitment to safety
Yes.
will always be at the heart of aviation. We're back and ready to wrap up our deep dive on the FAA's big move to make those flight decks even safer.
We've really gotten into the details of these new physical barriers, the IPSBs,
We have.
and why the FAA thinks they're so important.
We've even talked about how this might change the whole aviation industry.
It's been fascinating.
It really has.
So as we come to a close, what's the big takeaway you want listeners to remember?
Well, I think this new rule is a huge step forward.
I agree.
It's really making flying even safer.
We all remember how those reinforced doors were a big change.
Right.
But they can't stay closed all the time.
And that's where this new barrier comes in.
Exactly.
It's like an extra layer of protection for those times that door has to be open.
It gives you that peace of mind knowing there's a backup plan.
It does.
But like we talked about, it's not perfect.
Right.
There's still some questions out there,
Like, should it be on all L passenger planes?
including those older ones
What about cargo planes?
and international flights.
There's a lot to think about.
And that's what makes this whole thing so interesting.
It really does.
This one rule has started a much bigger conversation
It has.
about the future of flight deck security.
And for me, the most exciting part is how new technology might change things even more.
Absolutely.
We're already seeing things like biometric authentication,
Right.
AI that can spot threats,
It's like we're entering a whole new era for aviation security.
It really is.
But we can't forget that people are still a big part of this.
We need well-trained pilots and flight attendants.
And passengers who are paying attention.
We all have to do our part to keep things safe up there.
Well said.
Well, we've reached the end of our runway for today's deep dive.
We have.
But before we go, if anyone wants to keep learning about this...
You can find that full FAA document
on regulations.gov.
It's got all the details if you want to really dig in.
And next time you're getting ready to fly...
Take a second to think about all those security measures working behind the scenes.
It really is incredible.
All those people working together to keep you safe.
From the cockpit door to the crew to all the security folks.
It's all planned out so carefully.
To keep us safe up at 30,000 feet.
It shows you what we can do when we put our minds to it.
It really is a testament to human ingenuity.
And our commitment to safety.
So next time you're up in the air,
just remember,
there are a lot of people working hard to make sure you have a safe and smooth journey.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into flight deck security.
We'll see you next time
on The Deep Dive.